That's what Democrats are certainly focused on, and independents. And 59% of Nikki Haley's voters say they won't support him in the general election if he's the Republican nominee. That mirrors what we have been seeing in Iowa and New Hampshire. That's what
That was liberal Fox News host Jessica Tarlo breaking the bad news to MAGA. If any of them are willing to listen, their hearts will be broken by the news that even though Donald Trump did win on Saturday night in South Carolina, in the South Carolina primary by a very comfortable margin, there's actually a very devastating element of this primary for Donald Trump. And the results actually we've seen in all three so far. And here is this from the New York Times, the election results. Essentially, it's 60% to 40%. Trump, of course, with 60, Nikki Haley, of course, with 40. Now, just given the fact that Donald Trump is running a sort of I'm an incumbent, even though he's not, but was president very recently and running that sort of campaign and wants to be perceived as the presumptive nominee and unifying the party, 40% going for someone else is not good for him. On the other side, of course, Joe Biden is essentially 100% of support in the party in these primaries. And I know it's different, but that's definitely interesting. Donald Trump, not so much, 60%, but even more harmful for his general election prospects is the fact that in exit polling in South Carolina, 59%, 59, a clear majority of Nikki Haley voters say they're not going to vote for Donald Trump in the general election. Now, sure, some of those might be independents voting. Some of those may have never been willing to vote for Donald Trump. But some of those people have to be Republicans who are going for Nikki Haley now and aren't willing to do a general election Donald Trump vote, which is really big. If even a small portion of that 59% indeed goes against Trump and goes for Joe Biden especially, then that sinks Trump's chances in the general election for sure. Here's a similar point being made on Fox News during this coverage by Trey Gowdy.
In terms of unity, though, Brett, I mean, has he looked at the House of Representatives lately? Has he looked at the GOP Senate? I don't see a unified party. I see a party where over half of her supporters right now would not vote for him.
That's it. I am really excited by this. And as Jessica Tarlo pointed out, we've seen this in Iowa, in New Hampshire, and South Carolina with different exact numbers, but a similar message being sent from those supporting Nikki Haley, which is we don't want Trump even in a general election. And that's really good. And we've seen anecdotally clips of Republican voters going in to vote saying they're Nikki Haley supporters, but saying they won't vote for Trump when they get asked. They are resonating with what I've tried to make clear on this show every single day because of the #1 most important issue, and that is that Trump threatens democracy. And that's what some of these voters are saying, which is really good. And it gets to what I wish would be a unified understanding in this country, which is we can have different policy preferences. We can have really heated arguments about those policy preferences because I think some policies that conservatives hold are really harmful to people. And so we should debate those things. But we can't have that debate. We can't have that political battle in positions of power if the foundation of our democracy that everything else is built on crumbles. And that's what Trump threatens to do. That's what he tried to do in 2020 and 2021 when he attempted to block the peaceful transfer of power. That's what he intends on doing in a second term, with him calling for the termination of the Constitution, saying the government should go after media outlets he doesn't like, saying he's going to indict his political opponents, Project 2025, all these ways of centralizing control for the presidency and uprooting the bureaucracy so no one can oppose Trump. And all these different things point to our democracy, the foundation of our democracy could crumble in a second Trump term. And so that should be the #1 issue for everyone. And if it is, then you see this election, you say, even if you aren't like me and you don't think that Joe Biden's been a really successful president, then it still shouldn't matter because we can disagree on those sorts of policies. We can't disagree in a functioning democratic society on the democratic process continuing and having democratic leaders and rejecting authoritarianism. And so the fact that some of Nikki Haley's support comes from people who say essentially that, yeah, I don't like Joe Biden, but democracy has to be #1 in terms of issues I'm voting on, is really hopeful. We'll see how that plays out in the general, but I think that should give us some hope. And to those Republicans also, if you're hesitant to vote for Joe Biden, but you know you won't vote for Donald Trump, reach out, okay? I have some reasons that I think Joe Biden actually has been helping your life in a very substantial fashion. But moving off from that, because we're on the subject of the South Carolina primary, some moments from Trump's speech in South Carolina were ridiculous. So let's walk through some of those. Here he forgets to say the name of his least favorite son, Eric Trump.
First of all, my family, Melania, Barron, Don Jr. and Kimberly, Ivanka and Jared, Tiffany and Michael. They're so supportive. So supportive of me, and we really appreciate it and love them. They're great. We have a great family.
Oof. I do love that he's reading off the names of his family members and then forgets. So someone didn't put that in his notes, or he just forgot to read it, or he purposefully didn't read it because Eric is his least favorite child. I don't know if that's true. It seems to be the case, but who knows? Then here's an example of Trump just really not being great at executing these speeches and delivering them in a way that is very coherent and, God forbid, impactful. Here, he's trying to make a point about the border. Squirrel gets distracted and starts talking about Election Day.
We're not going to let this go on because it is not sustainable by any country. You cannot let, I believe, the number by the time we get him out. And remember the date, November 5th. It's going to be the most important date, perhaps, in the history of our country. The election is on November 5th. So we have Michigan coming next week. We have Super Tuesday. We have Ball coming. You know, we've set a record so far in every single, in Iowa, we got the most votes in history times two, just like this, the biggest margin ever. We then went to New Hampshire. You know, New Hampshire and Iowa, they've been around a long time politically. We're not.
Yeah, so then he just forgot to say the number. He was trying to make a point about how many people have, I guess, come across the southern border. And that number, by the time we get to the end of this, is going to be, and on Election Day, crazy there. Here, and this actually makes me really happy. Nancy Mace got mentioned by Trump, and he's being complimentary of her. Of course, she's a Republican congresswoman from South Carolina, and the crowd doesn't seem to be big on Nancy Mace.
They're gone. The impeachers are all gone. Nancy Mace is here, a non-controversial person, but she's a real advocate, and she's become a real...
You heard a little bit of grumbling there. And the reason that's good is because Nancy Mace has been doing this really aggravating thing where, and she sort of stopped it now, but what she was doing was she would pretend to be moderate when she would go on mainstream networks and say some more reasonable things on abortion and criticize Republicans for their extreme stances on abortion. And then she got labeled as a moderate Republican because of that. Then she would use that moderate Republican credibility to go on right-wing networks and say super crazy stuff, including that Joe Biden's the most corrupt president in American history, and all these allegations are good and substantiated and accurate and all that. And so she would really dishonestly play these two different characters. Now she's given up on that and she's just leaned into full MAGA. But still, I guess the followers have received word that she's done that flip-flop, and that's making them not happy with her. Then someone the crowd is much more excited about, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Trump says things that just could not be further from the truth about her.
A woman who was actually out campaigning today. She is the hardest worker. I said, Marjorie, this is Marjorie Taylor Greene. I said, Marjorie, you don't have to do. She went to a polling sector and she had the Trump flag and she's waving it and screaming vote. I said, Marjorie, it's 4:30. It's just about over for the vote. Please. She said, nope, I'm staying longer. This is the hardest working, wherever you are, the most incredible woman. She's respected by everybody. She is very smart. And I'm just very happy that she's on our side. Right, Eric? I'm very happy.
If I said, I'm going to give you a description of a person Then I want you to write down who you think I'm thinking of. Respected by everybody, very smart. Write down a few people. I think you would have to get to whatever the population of the planet is exactly to get to Marjorie Taylor Greene in those guesses. Yikes. So there it is. Actually really scary for Trump that a majority of Nikki Haley voters are saying we don't want that, and we don't want it so much that we won't vote for Trump in a general election. And that's really good news, but he did technically prevail in this primary and will likely do the same until he's the nominee. Then we'll hopefully lose to Joe Biden in the general. Make sure you are subscribed to the YouTube channel